What if I were to tell you that maybe we've been overthinking marathon training this whole time? Not just that, but many of us could actually be running faster marathon times while not training so hard. At least that's what a landmark, first of its kind study of over 150,000 marathon finishes is suggesting. You see, a group of researchers from the University of Hertfordshire got their hands on the Strava data for over 151,000 marathon training cycles, which is the 16 weeks leading up to a marathon and the marathon run itself. It's a lot of data. Just to put this in perspective, this is the first time that a study has analyzed the marathon training strategies of recreational runners like you or I on this scale. Now, I'll link to the study below, but here's what you need to know. So the first thing they did was they took every single run in their data set and they sorted it into one of three buckets. To keep things simple for this video, the three buckets are essentially easy runs, moderate runs, and hard runs. Easy runs, you want to think of your classic slow conversational pace runs down at heart rate zone 1 or 2. Moderate runs are your threshold style runs, so think of a pace that you could maintain for 45 to 60 minutes. And for hard runs, they're referring to sprints, intervals, high intensity type stuff. The study then looks at how much time each runner spends in each zone as a percentage of their total training and categorizes each runner into a different training strategy. So the first strategy is pyramidal. This is when you're mostly doing easy, slow miles, some moderate training, and a little bit of hard training. The second strategy is polarized, when you're doing a lot of easy miles, a lot of hard, intense workouts, and very little in the middle. The third strategy is moderate, where you're doing a lot of that heart rate zone 3, heart rate zone 4, moderate style workouts. And the fourth strategy is the high intensity training strategy, where you're doing the majority of your training in that intense hard mode. And here's what this study found. There were actually a bunch of interesting insights. Some of them I've covered in my article, which I'll link to below. But for this video, I want to focus on two. First takeaway, pyramidal training for the win. This might not be groundbreaking stuff for a lot of you, but this study found that most of the runners did follow a pyramidal approach, and that proportion was higher in the faster runners. Remember, pyramidal means you're doing the majority of your runs as easy, slow miles, some moderate running, and pretty limited intense running. This approach lends itself to accumulating high training volume because the majority of it's done at an easy pace, so you're not putting undue stress on your body. The study found that both male and female runners, younger and older runners, basically everybody benefited from using the pyramidal approach. And while the men in the study tended to log slightly higher training volumes, the principles held true regardless of demographics. Now, this isn't much of a revelation. Most coaches these days, anybody familiar with 80-20 running or the Lydiard method of marathon training, will be familiar with this idea of doing the bulk of your training as slow, easy miles. But I'm not finished. Where it gets interesting is the second takeaway, which is faster runners don't do more hard training. Just to clarify, the fastest runners in the study do book a lot more miles than the slower runners. It's just that practically all of those extra miles are done as easy runs. The study itself says total training time completed within zone 2, moderate runs, and zone 3, hard runs, remained relatively stable irrespective of marathon performance. In other words, for most recreational runners, if you want to improve your marathon time, you don't need to add more moderate or hard workouts. You just need to add more easy miles. Now, some might say we already knew this, and they'll pull up the training plans of somebody like Kipchoge, who's doing over 100 miles a week when he's in marathon preparation mode, and let's say over 80% of that is his easy pace. But I don't think it's right to compare the methodologies used by elites, who are professionals, and recreational runners like you and I. So you might be asking yourself, can I just dump all those moderate and hard workouts and just go and run slow for the rest of my life? Probably not. Those moderate runs you're doing, the threshold runs, the pace runs, are providing race-specific preparation by simulating your marathon pace. And the hard or intense runs are important for developing speed and efficiency. You've just got to be careful not to overdo it and risk overtraining. So yeah, it's probably a mistake to just do a ton of easy runs in training and think you can turn up on race day and run a sub 3-hour marathon or whatever. So how many moderate and hard run workouts per week do we actually need to do in our marathon training? Well, at least in the study, it showed pretty consistently that runners using the pyramidal approach, whether it's slower or faster runners, typically did 1 or 2 hard and moderate workouts per week. Now, this is getting into the realm of your specific running experience, background, marathon goals, and working with a coach to figure out what those moderate and hard workouts should look like. And again, what was interesting about this study was it showed that all the differences in marathon finishing times came down to the volume of easy miles done. So how many easy miles do we need to do per week for different marathon finish times? Okay, it feels like we've got to the part of the video that everybody's going to skip to. Just tell me how many slow miles I need to run to hit my marathon goal. Now, this information isn't actually included in this study, but I've pretty much extrapolated it out based on the information in this study that talks about the percentage of time spent in each zone versus marathon finish time. You can get a pretty good estimate of, according to the data, how much easy miles per week are required to hit different marathon goals. Now, this section is going to come with a few disclaimers. I can just feel the debate raging in the comments already. First, every runner is different. There's no such thing as an average runner. Everybody's running experience is different. So much can happen in your training on race day. There's so many other factors to think about and that affect your actual marathon finish time, not just the amount of slow miles you run. But this study shows that when you get a big group of numbers, it can be an indicator. Second, when we're talking about this study, we're talking about average weekly miles. Now, you've got to remember that in your marathon training, it should consist of a build phase of, let's say, 3 to 4 months and a taper phase 2 to 3 weeks, so your weekly mileage varies. Finally, this isn't the secret formula to marathon training success. This is just me extrapolating data from a giant study to look at, roughly talking, how many slow miles equate to a specific finish time. So here we go. I'll leave this on the screen for a second, but you can see here that a typical 3-hour marathon finisher was doing an average of 34 miles per week. 3:30 marathon finisher was doing 25 easy miles per week, and 4-hour marathon finisher was doing 19 easy miles per week. Now, just to underline, that does not mean that if you hit that average weekly easy mileage, you're going to get the corresponding marathon finish time. You might be faster, you might be slower. Again, there are so many factors that influence this. You've just got to take this as an average based on a huge data set. But it's a pretty good indicator. Remember, this is the actual Strava data from over 150,000 marathon training cycles and marathon training runs. So for me personally, it is very much a recreational marathon runner. I took away 2 things from this study. One is to avoid the temptation to do too much moderate or hard run workouts as part of marathon training just because they feel productive. I think probably a lot of you can identify with this. It feels good to go hard and to push yourself. And especially when you're preparing for a race, it feels like you're doing something right if you come home and you're pretty exhausted. But often during marathon training, you don't want to overdo it. And as the data shows, running slower for longer can add more value than pushing yourself. And personal takeaway number 2 is, if in doubt, just add more easy miles. They're low intensity, they're easy to do. You don't need much willpower to put on your shoes and go for an easy run. They're what everybody from Kipchoge to the 5-hour marathon finisher is doing. They work. Don't overthink it. In other words, when I'm gearing up for my next marathon training block, I'm going to be less likely to try and squeeze in the latest fad, a high intensity workout, and I'm just going to keep it simple. So now you've got the marathon training theory, it's time to put it into practice. I'm going to link below to all of our best marathon training resources, including our free marathon training plans, which follow largely the principles I've been talking about in this video, our premium marathon training plans over at TrainingPeaks, and everything else from the newsletter to the podcast to everything we've got at Marathon Handbook. Thanks for watching.